Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending our webinars on risk and compliance. We'll get started in a minute. I think most of the people have come in, so let's get started. I just wanted to share maybe a screen or two just to explain at a high level what RiskPro is. So RiskPro is an Indian organization focusing on risk management and compliance, and we've been in business for about 7+ years. Our focus for the risk and compliance webinars is essentially to bring in knowledge and share knowledge with industry people, bring in expertise, and continuously have different types of webinars that will be maybe possibly adding value to your knowledge base. Here you see a very quick overview of the agenda. So we're going to talk about the speaker introduction a little bit, very high level. And today's topic will be for approximately 50 minutes. And if there are any questions and answers, we'll be taking them at the end of the session. All the participants are in mute mode, and you can listen in, but you will not be able to talk in between the session. And towards the end, you can essentially drop your questions via the chat panel. At the bottom, you will see a chat window. Through the chat window, you can send across your questions, and we will address that at the end of the webinar session. And if there's any problem in terms of technical difficulties, you cannot hear us, you can again drop a chat message and we will try to address that. So let's get started, and I will be sharing these slides later on. Okay, so just getting started now. Let me just open that. Okay, so this session today will be on end user computing. The topic is very relevant for today. It focuses on what are EUCs and what are the risks that we perceive in this aspect. So we'll be covering based on the agenda. This is a quick introduction about myself for the people who possibly may not know me. I'm the co-founder, director of RiskPro, and I have 20 years plus of experience in risk management and internal audit. Along with me, my colleague will be there, Nivedita Ampiholi, and she is essentially focusing on, again, risk management, internal audits. Both of us will be going through the session covering different aspects of EUC risks. Here we have an overview of the agenda for today. EUC overviews, what are these example risks in EUC? We have case studies and what are the large global EUC risks and losses that have occurred. EUC risks embedded in various regulations, governance and auditing EUC. So you should be now you should be able to see the screens. I have just turned it on as we get started. Okay, so first section is EUC overview. Here we are talking about what is an EUC. So let's explore at the initial stages what is an EUC. But to do that, let's also understand what an EUC is not. So here we have an example of a to-do list, which is essentially on Excel. Now here you have a to-do list, which is a list of items that you have put together. And on the other side, we have an application, which could be an ERP application. And in between these two extremes of a simple to-do list and a complex ERP application sits a set of end-user computing applications, spreadsheets, models, and modules, tools, which have been built by individuals and in the organization, and which act as an interface between processing and activity, so that you can carry out the functions of business logics as well as financial reporting and various aspects. So an EUC is not a full-fledged and controlled software. At the same time, an EUC is not just a simple list of items. it is something that serves a purpose, and it is something that inherently could have risks associated with it, which could result in financial and non-financial losses. So an EUC, as we know, is not an enterprise-grade software application. It is a system in which individuals are able to create working applications beyond the divided development process of design, build, test, release, and all. So whenever we talk about an enterprise application, we talk about design, build, test, release management, change management, access management, and it's highly controlled. However, EUCs are nothing but applications that have been created by individuals within the business unit for their specific purposes and specific tasks. And a most common example that we see is Microsoft Excel is one of the most common examples of EUCs, and these are used quite a bit in business organizations. And that is the reason why these risks are very high and very inherent in the nature of the business of most organizations. I'm sharing here some examples of different types of EUCs. So as I mentioned, pretty much 90% plus of the businesses will have a lot of financial reporting in the form of Excel sheets. So you would have financial reporting in the form of monthly close process, consolidation spreadsheets, subsidiary parent consolidations, annual reporting schedules, vendor master, accounts payable masters. You would have list of vendors and their bank details, addresses, PAN numbers, GST numbers, commission calculations, bonus calculations, performance appraisal, employee masters, payroll masters. You could have a list of designated persons for the purpose of insider trading for compliances, related party transactions, list of related parties in the organization. So when you see this list of examples, you will get a sense of what can go wrong. Essentially, you have data, and the data could be misused, it could be erroneously deleted, it could be modified, just get into a specific cell and you overwrite, the data has been lost. So this is, you can inherently try to understand that most of these examples are very common day examples, and they do result in significant exposure to the organization. So EUC risk is nothing but the risk of financial and reputational losses that occur due to improper use of end user systems. Okay, so we now know at a high level what an EUC is. EUC is mostly an Excel spreadsheet, but it could also be a SharePoint application. It could be a utility created, a web form. It could be a to-do list of some specific workflow that has been built in. And these are essentially not controlled by the IT department. These are mainly controlled by the business, and they are usually not access controlled very strongly to ensure confidentiality of data. So, and in today's world, when we talk about information security, we talk about data privacy, we are really running the risk of EUCs at large. So who uses them? Pretty much, I would say a lot of departments would use them, and a lot of types of companies. So it could be financial business analysts. They would be creating spreadsheets. It could be back office employees, your BPO, KPO, call centers. It could be project managers. Of course, we have talked about accounting department. We have talked about HR department, payroll, investment bankers who carry out valuations, who carry out a lot of models in terms of valuation of organizations. So all of them are using some element of EUC, and all of them are running the same risk, that these are uncontrolled applications which don't have all the control measures necessary to mitigate the risks of EUC. So why do we use them? So the main reason why we use these are essentially to reduce cost. Applications which are controlled, enterprise applications are expensive. They involve a lot of cost of in terms of development, in terms of maintenance, change management. EUCs help us to increase efficiency because it is something we can just quickly open an Excel spreadsheet and start typing and saving data. So for the layman user, it seems to be increasing efficiency, although in the long term it does have its own effect of operational risk. It has less turnaround time, which means you can see the results very quickly. You can create reports. You actually, in fact, that's another example of what an EUC is. You take a lot of data dump from applications and you bring them into Excel. You do carry out reporting for management. You do presentations. Even those examples of EUCs will be something that can result in losses. It can result in financial errors. It can result in reputational impact if certain line item has been wrongly categorized, wrongly grouped. So those are some of the examples that when you want to do reporting, you may actually do it through an spreadsheet. It allows users to directly manage, control, manipulate data at speed, and that's another reason why EUCs and spreadsheets are used, because you can do things very fast. You don't need approvals for many of these activities, and it helps businesses to deploy solutions in response to changing markets and dynamics. So taking an example of an accounting spreadsheet, if tomorrow your accounting standards change, if tomorrow the regulation changes, formulas changes, tax rates changes, you can quickly go in, change the cell, and the tax rate has changed and the calculations have changed. But whereas if you were to do it in an enterprise, you would have to write a ticket to your IT department to actually carry out the change. And if the application is maintained by a vendor, then you have to make a change request to the vendor. So there are lots of reasons why we use them, but I would say that there should be many more reasons why we should not use them. And that's what the focus of this webinar would be, is essentially to highlight what are the risks inherent in that. And we have a lot of data and examples of what are the risks in such EUCs. So here we have some statistics which talks about why EUCs are important, or what are the high and scary statistics around that. So studies, and all these 4 studies you can see, approximately 85 to 90% of them, all the different studies have shown that all the spreadsheets have over 150 rows contain errors as a first study, and the next one you see, and the third one, essentially what we see is there's a very high error rate. Almost 90% plus spreadsheets have some sort of errors in them, or likely to have errors very soon. And if you look at the last one, F1, F9 estimated that 88% of all spreadsheets have errors in them, while 50% of these are used by large companies that have material defects. And the source is CNBC. So, if you create an Excel sheet and you think all the formulas are working, all the linkages are working, these statistics will tell you that if you have 10 spreadsheets, 90% or 9 of them are likely to have some level of error. And if that error relates to regulatory compliances, if it relates to internal financial controls, IFC as per Companies Act, if it relates to SEBI requirements in terms of market disclosures, then you can understand the risk and the severity involved, that there's 90% chance you're going to have a wrong regulatory compliance and regulatory reporting. So these are statistics. I mean, when we were compiling this, we ourselves were kind of shocked that, okay, we're talking about 90%. It's a very large number of EUCs that could have errors, or that does have errors. So this is kind of an overview. Now I'll be handing it over to Nivedita. She'll take over. I'll just hand over the presentation to her. And while we are going through the session, you should always keep it in mind that we are talking about a risk that is not very well addressed in the Indian market. And Indian market is really, talking a lot about controls, talking a lot about risk management. But when it comes to Excel sheets, we use a lot of these Excel sheets. In fact, very few, companies are there which don't have Excel sheets, and I would say a lot of the large companies, they have possibly 100, 200, or 300 plus EUCs, and that is making life a lot difficult to manage. There are data points coming from different spreadsheets, and all this is creating a lot of challenges for companies. So Nivedita will kind of go over some of her presentation and data points on what are the example risks that are there in EUCs, and what are the case studies that have happened globally on these elements.
Thank you, Manoj. Just give me a moment while I put this on the slide view. Hi everyone, my name is Nivedita, and as Manoj said, That was quite an eye-opening slide where he mentioned about the statistics. So when you look at the error rates, you will be surprised, you will be shocked to know that we use this daily, spreadsheets on a daily basis for almost everything in our work, but we don't know what risk it can, pose the organization to. So this is a slide, we have taken it from, it's an extract from USPRIC, the European Spreadsheet Risk Interest Group. So what it says is uncontrolled and untested spreadsheet models pose a significant business risk. Now, it could be loss of revenue, profits, mispricing. We also might end up taking, wrong decisions because of these undetected errors. Malicious tampering, we are referring to the fraud risk here, difficulties in demonstrating the regulatory compliance. So we all know there is an inherent risk in an Excel file, right? This has been there right from the advent of these tools. But over the times, these tools have become so critical to our financial or any other operations that we actually tend to ignore the significant risk it poses to. So why does this risk happen? I mean, why do we have this risk? It's because they are, we kind of ignore what can go wrong if there is an error in a spreadsheet. We might just simply say, oh, there's a small error, we can always rectify it. But when you're using it for critical processes, like how Manoj gave certain examples, be it in a regulatory environment, in the financial environment, in a banking industry, the risks which are ignored will have a widespread failure. Your organization really have to, go into a lot of these risks and consequences. They face consequences. So if we ask the question, so what? Then comes the next slide, which categorizes the risk that an EUC can pose to. So basically what we have done is we've brought in about 6 major categories of risks here. So now that we know that our dependency on spreadsheets or any EUCs will not go down, what we have to assess as an organization is probably to understand and assess the risk involved in that. Financial misstatement risk. A very common practice where we use Excel files day in and day out to, we prepare our financial statements, we present it in an Excel form, we do a lot of work on the Excel files, sorting, filtering, anything that we do. If your spreadsheet contains errors and it goes undetected, then your entire report is inaccurate. It's completely wrong. So that's the financial misstatement risk. Regulatory risk, when you have spreadsheets associated with very poor security features, it could be weak data encryption or data leakage. The significance in today's world, as he mentioned, we all know about the GDPR and data security issues, right? So if you end up sharing information to the unauthorized people, then you actually are looking at the regulatory risk. Operational risk. The reality is many organizations rely on the spreadsheet to support their operational process and to take key decisions. It could be related to trading. A lot of banking people does this, investment bankers do it. So you look at your spreadsheet and you start taking your trading decisions. You do a lot of reconciliations, you do a lot of data analysis. And as he mentioned, the other area is the employee bonus compensations. You are relying on an Excel file to take significant decisions, very key decisions. So if something goes wrong, then your decisions will also have the same kind of consequences. So these spreadsheets, if it's not managed appropriately, if it's unaudited, they really represent a danger to the organization. The fraud risk. Now, if anyone can identify errors in a spreadsheet, so do fraudsters. So they know where are the loopholes. So if someone needs to really commit a fraud intentionally, they want to tamper the spreadsheet, it is not very difficult. So this leads to the internal fraud risk. The data protection, the data governance risk, as Manoj rightly pointed, the topic of the town is data security because of all the data that sits on the cloud, that, because we are in a global scenario where data keeps moving from one place to the other. We send emails, we put it on shared drives, we put it on Google Drives. So data protection is very important. We will certainly see some of the examples in coming slides as to how big this risk is. There have been losses in major organizations due to all of this. When we come to examples, you will know about it better. The last one is the process and execution. This is more of technical in nature. While you're processing, executing any action using these EUCs, they also pose a lot of risk to the organization. What are the common type of errors? Now, why are we talking about this risk? So what is it that when I don't do right in an Excel file, what happens and what are the possible effects? So if you see the slide, the first column basically talks about the type of errors, and the extreme right column is the possible effects. So what is the ultimate result of that? So let's take a copy paste error. So we're really talking about very common errors. Okay, I think all of us have encountered these kind of errors. So a copy paste error where you might obtain a data from an external source. You kind of copy that, put it in another document. You might probably upload it into your mainstream application. So wherever you're doing this copy paste, it's a very common thing to do. Control C, Control V. We are very fascinated to do this. But when you do that, if for some reason you're copying it to an incorrect location, or you're overwriting on a current data, or the other option is also when you're not completely doing it. So when you copy, like say 10 cells, and all the 10 cells may not be, pasting it onto another document. We normally don't check that. We just do Control C, Control V, and close it. So what happens? Basically, your data is erroneous. It's not correct. Now that may result into financial losses, depending on what the scenario is. Regulatory fines, reputational damage. Now, these are more like the major categories of risk that you see in most of the incidents that we occur. Basically, if, say, for example, if you send an incorrect statement to your client, then it could also result in a regulatory risk, depending on the jurisdiction, and it can also result in a reputational damage. So the last column might, it might have the same kind of results, the possible effects in most of these scenarios. Format errors. Now we all know, it's very neat and organized to have data in a spreadsheet. It looks very neat when you have to present something. It has many options, charts, graphs, and everything. So it's like everyone's favorite. But what happens is if you're not storing the data in the correct format, a date has to go in the date format. A number has to be in a number format. If there is an error that occurs when you put it in an incorrect format, then your spreadsheet may not recognize it. And unfortunately, not for all the errors, spreadsheet throws an error. Yet there are some times when it says, when you type an incorrect formula, it might throw an error, but not for these kind of errors. You will never get a pop-up for this. So formatting errors are bigger errors. Failure to update data. One of the example I can take from Manoj's earlier slide is if you're using an EUC for regulatory purposes, for a regulatory reporting, you might have had certain macros built and codes in there, depending on the current regulation. When there is a change, if you don't update your spreadsheet accordingly, then you're actually not doing the correct reporting. So you're relying on a old data, which is not up to date. So if you're using it for some key purposes, for critical processes, then you have to really, update it accordingly. Typing errors, input errors, very common when you accidentally type one or two keys, one or two numbers. It kind of results in erroneous spreadsheets. Multiple error documents, this scenario is more of where, a global scenario where multiple users are using the same document. Then it's very difficult to have a control on a single file. Hidden data, very common. If you're working on an Excel file, you might want to just hide some of the rows and columns because you need to focus on a particular data, or it's too vast a data for you to work on. But unfortunately, you may forget to unhide it after it's all done. So the major risk is the leak of confidential information in this. Apart from these, we've also taken some of the extract from USPRE. These are called more of functional errors, like hard coding when one or more numbers appear in your formulas. Reference errors, say for example, if you have a formula that is supposed to say refer to A1 cell and you just type A11, then you're giving an incorrect reference. Logic error, a formula which is used incorrectly, which will ultimately lead to a incorrect result. Copy paste, we spoke about this from the data perspective, but what we're also talking about here is on the formula part of it. Probably you want to copy a formula from one file to another file. If you don't really know the formula well, or if you're pasting an incorrect formula, then that gives you an incorrect result. Omission error, a formula is wrong because of an inaccurate use of copy paste. And the data input, where the data incorrect is wrong. So there are ample evidences. We might have heard that many organizations have, undergone, they've experienced huge losses due to these EUCs. So despite these, the corporations doesn't really pay a lot of attention to the spreadsheet errors. But today what we're going to talk about is some of these real big losses that has happened because of the basic spreadsheet errors. Banking powerhouse Barclays accidentally got 179 more contracts than they intended. Now, this was a clear case of hidden cells where they ended up buying 179 more contracts than what they wanted to buy. Basic Excel flaws and incorrect testing led JP Morgan lose more than 6 billion. Now, if you look at the amount, we say 6 billion, we're not talking of $10, $20, but of $6 million, and that's due to basic Excel flaws. A cut and paste error, we just spoke about it, cost TransAlta company 24 million. Now, it doesn't even leave the spies. MI5, this happened in 2010, where the British intelligence agency, they actually bought more than 1,000 wrong phones. That's a funny incident, no financial loss, but yes, a very high reputational damage. Fertility suffered a loss of 2.6 billion when their Methylene fund was forced to cancel. This was again due to a very simple Excel error, a missing negative sign. So when I just look at these clouds, what am I talking about? I'm saying a cut and paste error, a basic Excel flaw, but I'm talking about millions of rupees that has gone under the drain, right? So what we do today is, it's scary, it is horror. You have a spreadsheet with a simple error, but it can still lead your organization to big losses. So we will talk about some of the horror stories here. We will go one by one and see how, not having enough control, sufficient control on the spreadsheets can lead to these kind of damages. If you see on the upper right hand, column of the slide, it talks about the risk. So we are talking about the primary risk here. It may have multiple risks, but we will only bring out the primary risk in the slide here. So this is related to Boeing, where the email spreadsheet contained private data in hidden columns. So one of the company employee, he mistakenly emailed a spreadsheet full of employee personal data to his spouse. This happened in November 2016. So the spreadsheet the employee sent, it contained personal information of roughly 36,000 employees. So we're talking of, the leak of confidential information because they were hidden. So you forget to unhide the columns. You don't even know what is there in that spreadsheet hidden. Once you send it, the other person can access all the information in the spreadsheet. So this is related to the hidden columns. Marks and Spencer. We're talking about the reputation risk. This is a clear example of that. So Marks and Spencer, they actually issued a statement, the quarterly trading statement. In the morning when they reported, they said that the sales had grown by 1.3%. But the inventor realized that due to an error in the spreadsheet, it was the wrong figure. So they came back and they again said in the noon that, the sales had actually gone down by 4%. So what happened here is people don't trust you. So they'll be like, okay, you know what? You tell me a figure in the morning, you tell me a figure in the noon, and you're telling me this is just because of a spreadsheet. Then they lose confidence. The investor lose confidence. That's your reputation risk. The other horror story, which is related to regulatory sanction. TIPCO spreadsheet error cost TIPCO shareholders 100 million. What happened in this case was the Goldman Sachs, who was advising TIPCO on this deal, they used a spreadsheet to calculate the equity value of TIPCO. Now, they said it was about 4.2 million, but unfortunately, they also calculated a lot of other restricted stocks, which shouldn't have been a part of this. So, because this was a regulatory filing, the bigger risk here, the primary risk would be the regulatory risk. So, in fact, Goldman Sachs also, it affected the fairness opinion of Goldman Sachs after this incident, but yes, this was one of that. Loss of shareholders' confidence, similar to reputation risk. Bigger organization where people invest in your organization. If you're not honest and true and giving out your statements, you have to be very careful. This was the case where Fannie Mae corrects mistakes in their results. So this was related to an implementation of accounting standard. A clear example where you have a spreadsheet for your regulatory purposes. Whenever there is a change, you have to update that. If you forget to update that, then you're working on an old data. So your report, the outcome of the spreadsheet is incorrect. So this was one of such cases. False information. This is related to North American Mission Board. Now, this is a case where when you have to just say 2 and your spreadsheet takes 2 plus 2 and your total is 4. So the same case happened here where they should have taken the states of Texas and Virginia as 2, but overall when they were working on a spreadsheet, it led to a double count of the 2 states. So they had to kind of go back and report it and say that we made a mistake and here is the correct report. So this was, the case of false information. Money loss. Hungary's Central Services Directorate fined for misleading spreadsheet. This is not a case, but yes, we can also refer to the regulatory fines, penalties that you may encounter when such things happen. But this is one such case where the bidders, they received a spreadsheet with 2 columns when they called for the tender. So what they were supposed to do was to say that you're only supposed to update the first column of the bidding and not the second column. But most of the bidders misunderstood that and they actually filled in the second column too. So they had to kind of redo the exercise all over again. And the HU of 2 million was paid as a fine for misleading the spreadsheet. So these are some of the horror stories. If you actually see most of these, we're talking about very simple errors in spreadsheet, right? Now, this can also happen when someone wants to intentionally, tamper your spreadsheet. That brings us to the next one, which is a cause of deliberate fraud. So if someone really wants to do a fraud, they can go ahead and tamper your spreadsheet. They can hide, something which you shouldn't be seeing, and they can actually commit a fraud. The same thing happened in UBS case, where a UBS trader, he started kind of he did deals exceeding his trade limits. He masked the true positions. He did everything that he could do with a spreadsheet, and finally, he was actually convicted. And if you see the consequences, it can also lead to imprisonment. So if you do something as serious as that, it can also lead to imprisonment. So spreadsheets are very dangerous. Now, when we say that, we need to have sufficient controls. We know we can't, do anything without spreadsheets. It's good to use them, but with sufficient controls. Have enough checks, have enough controls around it to make sure you're really not encountering these kind of errors. So what is it that you should do to have sufficient governance around the spreadsheet? I'll actually hand over this to Manoj. There is a section on the EUC governance that he will be taking care of, and he will take you through some of the slides related to that. Manoj, over to you.
Thank you, Nivedita. So looking into the next section, which is on EUC governance. So we have understood what an EUC is. We have understood some of the challenges and the risks posed by these EUCs. Now let's see how we can actually manage them. So here we have a 5-section EUC governance framework. The first one is a policy framework that defines roles, responsibilities, and what is an EUC, who can create EUCs. So that's a policy framework which is essential for any organization in order to manage them effectively, specifically large companies who have hundreds and thousands of such documents. The second one is an EUC inventory, and third, fourth, fifth, EUC control and guidelines, training awareness, and EUC audits. So while I'll be touching upon some of these points in more detail, some of them will be more like at a high level, like EUC policy. We'll just kind of do a very quick overview on that. But of these 5 points, the 2 or 3 most important points are point number 2, which is an EUC inventory. We need to take stock of what exists in the company and what are the risks associated to those. Point number 3, we need to define a control framework. Who can access them? Who can change them? Who has to, basically own them? Those kind of controls, and we'll see a lot of those controls and guidelines. And the 5th one is again a very important one, and pretty much I would say less than 10% of the companies are actually doing EUC audits, which means you have spreadsheets. Okay, can we go and audit them? Can we go and verify that, okay, are we following all the guidelines? Do we have a strong framework for EUC management? So this 1, 2, 2, 3, 5 are possibly some of the important points. We'll be touching upon 2 and 3 a little bit in more detail. So EUC policy guideline is, just a second, I just got a message, just make sure we're okay. EUC policy, we need to design a policy as part of the overall risk management strategy that includes definition, owners, who are the people who will value them, who are the criticalities of different EUCs, who can authorize. We need to get all these policy frameworks approved and a buy-in from different departments so that they abide by these regulations. And this essentially creates the architecture for creating good EUCs and viable EUCs which are well controlled in the company. So I'll not get into a lot of details on this because the focus today is more on actually how to build inventories and how to control them effectively. So the second section on the EUC governance is essentially and EUC inventory. So the first one here we see is we need to get a list of all the EUCs that are existing in your company. You'll be surprised that there will be a pretty large list in most organizations, and some of them may not even be aware of such lists. So there are 2 approaches to managing EUCs or identifying them. The first one is a top-down approach, and the second is a bottom-up approach. In a top-down, what we have is we have to identify critical business areas and identify maybe using elements such as balance sheet, income statement as a starting point. So you could look at, okay, if you have a sales account, then okay, what are the spreadsheets that are supporting sales? If you have loans and advances, what are the spreadsheets that are supporting loans or interest calculations, interest payables, provisions? So those could be some of the starting points, and then you work your way backwards from the most critical element to see what are the 5 to 10 material EUCs that are used in the departments. And then you build an inventory of those and we track them. The benefit or the plus point of this approach is that all the high risk EUCs have been identified and managed. The second approach is we task with each department head and we tell them to list out all the Excel spreadsheets and uncontrolled applications that they use. They would go ahead and do a scan of the department and list out all the different files that are used and the purposes of the file. The central team will build an inventory of all these and bring up a list of all the EUCs that are used by the company. The downside to this is, it can be a very painful process to identify them. The plus point is it does build up a very strong, exhaustive, or comprehensive listing of EUCs. So this point is very important because it brings up an inventory. It tells you which EUC is used for what purpose and what are the implications of that file at the end of the processing. So if you're doing something on payroll and lots of companies today in India, SMEs are managing payroll, managing employee master data on Excel. So we know the end impact of that, and possibly if your starting point is our salaries could be wrong, then we try to find out what are the 5 Excel sheets that support the salary statement, and then those are the ones that we need to control. So clearly, this is a very, very good starting point for companies to start managing EUCs, is to get a hold of all the EUCs in the company, list them out, the purposes, the owners, like make a simple another EUC, make a simple spreadsheet of EUC inventory on its own. The third section is on EUC controls. So here what we are trying to do is we are trying to build controls in order to use the EUCs. So as we have seen before, EUCs cannot be ignored. These are something businesses will always make. You take the international markets, the US, European, India, large companies, every company has spreadsheets. So, well, if we have them, let's manage them. And these are some examples of how they can be managed. We need to make EUCs more user friendly. Gone are the days when you just create certain columns, create certain rows, put some numbers, formulas, and and have an end result. Make your spreadsheets user friendly with proper labeling, proper headings, lines, some sort of coloring, so that people can follow through the logic of that spreadsheet. So that is quite important, is to make them user friendly. We need to add comments and notes, just like we add comments and notes in programming codes in software development, so that if a new user or if a user who's not used the spreadsheet is involved, he can understand and follow through why we are doing a specific calculation or why we are multiplying two numbers. If you are developing large complex EUCs, such as maybe I would say even, for example, consolidation spreadsheets, year-end accounting, we should have proper user manuals and we should establish adequate documentation to reduce the key man risk. So maybe, this is an example of very large complex, for example, actuarial calculations, or it could be, provisions or a certain very complex things. Now, if the person who's built this leaves the company, then actually there's quite a bit of loss and someone has to follow through the whole model as well as all the internal macros created in order to follow through that. So we need to build strong documentation around that. Then we need to lock down certain EUCs if needed. Lots of global companies are locking them into a read-only space where it cannot be modified by users. So once the user has built it, it actually gets stored centrally in a central server, and it gets locked in terms of change management. And so people cannot modify columns, formulas; they can only use them. So this is a good approach to handling EUCs by locking them, similar to an application. Versioning is important, so we need to build audit controls, change managements in terms of versioning and bringing some sort of a flow to that. And similarly, we'll see all these other different examples. You can read through some of the other points. We're building controls which mimic an application. On this next slide, we see again the 3 or 4 important things that are existing in an application, which is change management. We see basically who's the authorized users. So this is access management. We look at logical access management, such as password control, the different files, who can share the files, who can make changes to that. And of course, we also need to do backup and testing. And this is also an ignored factor in many companies. People create files, they take backups of these files, but not necessarily backing up in an effective and proper way, and not doing the retentions or not following the retention policy of companies. So the individuals may be backing up for the internal purposes, but they don't realize the corporate also has a retention policy of mandatory and regulatory compliance requirements. So on this slide, you would see all these 4 elements are very similar to an enterprise application. So the more you're able to build controls and guidelines that mimic an application, the more effective your EUC management or risk mitigation would be. On this next slide, we are looking at, again, some of the elements which I've seen before. Documentation, testing, access management, version controls, changes. So we have seen all these standards are very similar to an application. So now, now that we have kind of addressed these, let's also look at some of the regulations that are, basically helping us to manage these EUC risks. So there are a lot of global regulations that are mandating companies to take over and to address EUC risks. So I'll just, hand it over to Nivedita for about 5 minutes, and then once you spend those a couple of slides, let's see if you can have any specific questions and address those questions also. So Nivedita, over to you to take it over for the last 5 minutes. We are at 11:52, maybe about 5 minutes, and then we will hand it over for any questions and answers.
Sure, Manoj. So we will not go in very high detail of what regulations we have, but we will certainly touch base on a couple of those here. Though there are no specific regulations as of now, which specifically say this is how you need to regulate the spreadsheets, we still have about 4 listed here. One is the Sarbanes-Oxley, the auditing standard 2, where the companies need to document, and test the internal controls for spreadsheets, which are critical to financial reporting. Basel Committee also has a regulation that talks about manual processes. If a bank is relying on a spreadsheet for some manual processes, then they should have effective controls in place. GDPR, the very recent regulation on data protection, it applies to both personal data of clients on automated systems, even if it includes a spreadsheet. Dodd-Frank Act stress test. This clearly says that you should have an inventory of all models, including EUCs, which is used for any of these activities. So if you look at the slide, this is exactly the word that is listed in the standard. So if you have to comply with the SOT, say yes, auditing standard 2, your companies need to document, evaluate, and test the internal controls of spreadsheet if they are critical to financial reporting. All the same elements that Manoj was talking about, so you need to have sufficient controls. The Basel Committee clearly says if you rely on the manual processes, spreadsheets, and has specific risk units that use these applications, then it should have effective mitigants in place. When we talk about the mitigants, it's the similar controls what Manoj was mentioning about. You have version control, change controls, you should know where you're storing your EUCs, lockdown, all these controls should be in place and consistently applied across the bank's processes. Now, going back to this, Manoj, do you want to stop for questions and then see how do we do on this?
I think maybe you can just spend about 2 minutes on the next slide, which talks about auditing EUCs, and we plan to have another full session for 1 hour just addressing auditing EUCs.
Great. So as you know, there's a lot of details coming on this, but this is more like an overview. As we all know, internal audit is very much required to audit the EUC. Give me a moment. Yes, there you go. So these are like the 6 steps that you can identify. There could be 2 approaches when you do an internal audit. One, you can do a specific audit of EUCs. That is also a methodology. Or you can embed this as a part of your regular audit. When you're doing a process audit, you might probably want to also cover EUC as a part of this. So what you need to do is, the first step would be to identify all the potentially critical EUCs. When I talk about identify, I think we are coming back to the point of having a EUC inventory. Does the business have an inventory? Then you will have to probably make a list of all the EUCs and identify the critical ones. Once you have the critical ones, then you have to define the risk profile. Why is it used? And what can go wrong if the spreadsheet is not accurate? What is the risk? We spoke about fraud risk, financial misstatement risk, regulatory risk. So what is it, that actually defines, you need to define the risk profile for that particular spreadsheet. Then you go back and test the existing controls. So do they have any controls in place? Yes, then you might have to test that. If they say, oh no, we've logged all the formulas in the spreadsheet, we don't allow unauthorized users to modify this. So whatever the controls are, you will have to test the existing ones. So now you know the risk profile, now you know the existing controls. So what is, the risk exposure? So there is that, there's some element which is missing, and you might want to say that, hey, you know what, you have this control in place, but I see that, you may not have the other controls in place. So you might want to then come back and, report those control deficiencies to the management and recommend, remediation action for that. So you will probably have to go step by step in knowing what is there, what is existing, what is inherent, and what is the risk exposure. So probably you will have to define an audit methodology based on your risk assessment. So do we have any questions at this time? I'll pause here to see if you have any questions.
Absolutely, and this area is so broad in terms of so many aspects to cover, and India is a country that does not focus a lot on these risks because our regulations in India don't address them specifically like we have in SOX and Dodd-Frank and Basel. So when we come to India, we are actually at the, there is a little bit of element in terms of IPE, like information provided by entity, and some element of financial reporting related information, whether that is correct. But other than that, we don't have a whole lot. This good governance framework should let companies manage a lot of these EUCs. So we will be covering one more session on just auditing EUCs and how EUCs can be audited effectively. What are the things that need to be checked, and how an auditor can ensure that data is correctly compiled. If there's any questions, please send it across through the chat. There are a couple of questions. Let me see. Yeah, one of the questions is there a best practice around who should be owning the EUC management? Should be business or compliance? So to answer this question, EUCs are normally created by a business and they are owned by that business department. So if it's an HR would create them and would be owning them. So the ownership is okay to be with the users department or the business departments. But in terms of management, in terms of versioning, change management, auditing, so there should be a central oversight mechanism in place, and that can be the compliance department as you suggested, or it can be the risk management or the internal audit function. The next question we have is, you have covered Excel risks, but what about other EUC devices like desktops, laptops, mobile devices? How do we evaluate the risk pertaining to these? Nivedita, do you want to kind of address this? Any thoughts on this? So the question is that we have covered Excel risks, but not the devices such as desktops, laptops, mobiles.
Now, we can certainly look into that. As we said, when we talk about type of EUC applications, there are many. The reason why we specified on spreadsheets is because of the vast usage, in our day in and day out process. But well, I think the scenario will be a little different, but more or less the controls will still be the same around any type of EUCs that we talk about. We will still have to address the ownership controls. We still have to have, how do you protect the data in any device that we talk about? Yes, laptop and mobile is also mobiles. I would
Yeah.
certainly say is way more, riskier nowadays because we also work, get all our work stuff on the cell phones. But yes, we will have to address a similar kind of controls, in that.
Yeah. The next question is, to what degree should organizations look to eliminate EUC risks? Can it be completely addressed or too large a challenge? The answer I would say is history. So historically, like we have developed countries in the US, in Europe, EUCs have been around for as long as Excel has been around, and they continue to be around for that same duration. So I would say that it would be almost impossible to eliminate the baseline or the foundation of these applications, EUCs. But the risks, however, can be mitigated. So we can try to bring down the risks associated to that as much as possible, and through maybe building infrastructure, governance, risk management around that. So while the problem still exists, the solutions can be built on top of that to mitigate that risk of usage. And we should look not at eliminating that, but possibly mitigating to a level that is comfortable. Just like in any risk management, you cannot eliminate a risk, but you would actually minimize and bring it to an acceptable level.
Okay, just to add to that, I think we've not covered that in detail, but when you probably attend the auditing EUCA training, you will know that because we're also talking about how an awareness can be created, how a training can be given. It's just not top down, but also bottom up. Right from the senior management to an analyst level, people should know what an EUC is and what are the what is it that you need to do to make sure nothing goes wrong. So we will be talking about that in our next training.
Yeah. Is there an alternative to Excel spreadsheets? You did speak about a company which do not use Excels. I don't know. We might have mentioned. I don't remember specifically. But the alternative to Excel spreadsheets. So one of the suggestions I may have around this is, if your company is having a large Excel sheet based EUCs, you could also look at building it in a more controlled environment. It could be something like SharePoint, or it could be something that the IT department creates a portal for you, where it mimics very much like an Excel spreadsheet, but it brings in some level of control in terms of versioning, in terms of access management. So you can try to go something similar to an Excel spreadsheet, but not really Excel. And those applications are out there, and they can be explored and they can be used in the organization. Nivedita, this is for you. How to have a control on data downloaded in the spreadsheet from one ERP and is used to upload in the other portals, such as bank portals. This is with reference to payment processing. So the user is trying to ask that, okay, do we have controls where you download from one place and you upload to another place?
Right.
And the intermediary will always be an Excel sheet.
So what I would suggest is it's a very common thing. We do a lot of upload and download, right? So when you're actually taking data from one application onto a spreadsheet, there are a few things, very quick things that you can check. There are actually what I would say the conditional formatting values and formulas that you can have in spreadsheet to make sure it's 100% copied. So say you download data of 100 rows, you just have to probably quickly check if all the 100 is there. If the data is in the correct format. Now, a frequent monitoring of the spreadsheet, the critical spreadsheets you use, will also be helpful. Say, for example, if it's a risk calculation category or high one critical spreadsheet, right? So probably every quarter or at a set frequency, you might want to just go and test if the Excel file is working fine or not. Or another control, a compensating control that you can think of is to have a quick 4-eye check. Generally, what I have observed, in a banking process where it's more important, is once you upload a data onto some mainstream application, there is a peer review. There's a second eye check who is okay. This was the data out of this application, and now this is coming to the application, and I see it's okay. Or when you're downloading something and you're sending it to a client, then probably if it's very critical, you might have a peer review. You can have a double check on that. A secondary person can review it. So depending on the complexity of what that data is and what is it that you're using for, you may want to have some compensating controls. But yes, as Manoj said, there are the better way is to mitigate the risk. You just have to identify where the problem is and put a control at that point to address it.
So the questions are just continuing, and I don't think we have so much time. I mean, this is a busy day. We're in the first week of a new financial year. There are about 6 or 7 other questions that are pending. So what we'll do is we will answer them offline. There are questions from Sankalp, Jash, Rohit Gupta, Anu, Rima. So let's take them offline, and we are definitely doing one more session on the auditing EUC. Now that itself, I would say, if you're able to understand how to audit an EUC and what are the elements to look for, you can bring tremendous value. I mean, you just imagine if a EUC error can result in 1 million fine. Just by auditing that yourself, you're able to save the company 1 million fine. So whatever are the extent of losses that happen in EUC, that's the extent of potential revenue, that you can save for the organization by auditing them. So it'll be an important session. We are planning to have this maybe 3 to 4 weeks down as we compile our content and gather all the best practices. So look forward to that, and all these questions will be answered offline as well. Thank you very much for attending, and hope it was all good. And initially there were some people who were not able to hear us, some technical issues, but hopefully it should get resolved as we progress more, or maybe it was a one-time event. Thank you, Nivedita. Thank you very much, and glad you attended today's session. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone.